I stood beside the champagne tower, wishing I could disappear when my sister slipped her arm through mine. "There you are," Vanessa said with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Come meet my mother-in-law." I didn't resist, I rarely did anymore. Across the reception hall stood an elegant woman surrounded by guests who treated every word she spoke like it mattered. Everyone knew she was the groom's billionaire mother. Even before the ceremony, people had whispered about her success, her philanthropy, and the business empire her family had built. Vanessa stopped in front of her. "I'd like you to meet my little sister, Pash." The woman smiled politely. Before I could introduce myself, Vanessa laughed. "She's our family's biggest disappointment." A few nearby guests chuckled awkwardly, unsure whether it was a joke. My mother shrugged. "We try not to mention her," she said. "She never really lived up to her potential." Dad nodded as though they were discussing the weather instead of their own daughter. I kept my eyes on the floor. After years of hearing the same thing, I had learned that arguing only gave them another reason to mock me. Then everything changed. The billionaire mother stared at me. Not the casual glance of someone meeting another wedding guest. She studied my face. Her smile vanished. The conversation around us faded as she took one slow step closer. She whispered almost to herself, "So it's really you." No one spoke. Vanessa's confident grin faltered. The woman didn't even acknowledge my family anymore. She looked only at me, as though everyone else had disappeared. I searched her face, trying desperately to remember where we might have met. Nothing. I had never seen her before. Or at least, I didn't think I had. The silence stretched so long that guests nearby stopped talking to watch us. Then she took a careful breath. "I've been looking for you for years." Every head turned toward me. Vanessa blinked. "I'm sorry," I asked quietly. The woman gave a faint smile filled with unmistakable relief. "You probably don't remember me," she said, "but I've never forgotten your name." Vanessa forced out a laugh. "There has to be some mistake." But the woman ignored her completely. Instead, she held out her hand to me. "My name is Evelyn Carter." I shook it automatically, still completely confused. "I'm Pash." "I know exactly who you are." My parents exchanged puzzled looks. Dad frowned. "You've met our daughter before." "No," Evelyn answered softly, "not in the way you're thinking." The word sent another wave of silence across the room. I searched my memory again. Business conferences, libraries, archive projects, historical societies. Nothing connected. Vanessa stepped between us with an uncomfortable smile. "My sister works with old papers and dusty records," she joked. "Hardly the sort of work that crosses paths with someone like you." Several guests laughed politely. Evelyn didn't. Instead, her eyes narrowed just slightly before she looked back at me. There was sympathy in her expression, the kind you give someone after realizing they've been carrying a burden alone. "I've searched for hundreds of researchers over the years," she said quietly. Only one disappeared before I could properly thank her. I felt my pulse quicken. "Thank me? For what?" I had spent the last several years quietly rebuilding my career, after putting my own future on hold. Nothing I'd done had ever seemed important enough for someone like Evelyn Carter to remember. Yet she looked at me as though finding me had ended a search she'd nearly given up on. Then she spoke the words that made my stomach tighten. "We have a great deal to talk about." Before I could answer Evelyn, Vanessa stepped in front of me with a practiced smile. "I'm sure you're confusing her with someone else," she said. "Pash has always kept a very low profile. There's honestly nothing that remarkable about her." Evelyn looked at Vanessa for a moment, then back at me. "I'm quite certain I'm not mistaken." Vanessa laughed, but it sounded forced. "Trust me, if she'd done anything extraordinary, we'd know." I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. This wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. It felt like everyone except me knew there was a story I had somehow become part of. Evelyn's attention never left me. "I'd like to speak with you privately when you have a moment." Before I could respond, my mother sighed dramatically. Oh, Pash has always had a talent for attracting strange situations. Dad folded his arms. If she'd put half as much effort into building a successful career as she did chasing obscure projects, things might have turned out differently. Their words landed exactly the way they always had, as if the past could simply be rewritten until everyone accepted their version of it. Years earlier, I'd been offered a position with one of the country's most respected archival institutions. It was the opportunity I'd worked toward since graduate school. Then Grandpa got sick. His condition declined so quickly that someone had to stay with him. Vanessa said she couldn't risk interrupting her career. My parents insisted they couldn't manage alone. So I declined the position without hesitation. For nearly 18 months, Grandpa became my entire world. Hospital visits, medication schedules, long nights when he was frightened and simply wanted someone sitting beside him. When he passed away, the opportunity was gone. I started over from the bottom, taking contract work restoring damaged documents for museums, non-profits, and local historical collections. Whenever relatives asked what happened to my career, my parents never mentioned Grandpa. Instead, they would shrug. Pash just never lived up to her potential. Eventually, I stopped correcting them. It was easier than arguing with people who had already decided what to believe. Back in the reception hall, Evelyn quietly asked, "Do they really not know what you did?" My heart skipped. I took a nervous step closer and lowered my voice. "Please don't bring up the past." For the first time since we'd met, Evelyn looked genuinely stunned. Before Evelyn could respond, the wedding coordinator approached the head table. "Mrs. Carter, we're ready for your speech." She gave me one last thoughtful look. "This won't take long." As she walked toward the microphone, I let out a slow breath, hoping whatever strange misunderstanding had just happened would quietly disappear. Vanessa leaned close enough that only I could hear. "I don't know what game you're playing, but don't embarrass me today." "I'm not playing anything," I replied. She rolled her eyes. "Of course you're not." The room gradually settled as glasses stopped clinking and conversations faded. Everyone expected the groom's mother to give the usual heartfelt toast. Evelyn adjusted the microphone. "Before I congratulate the bride and groom," she began, "I'd like to tell a very different story." Curious murmurs spread through the ballroom. She smiled gently. "Years ago, my family came within days of losing everything my late husband had spent his life building." The room grew quiet. We believed every legal safeguard was in place. We were wrong. She paused, letting the silence settle. Someone had hidden fraudulent ownership documents among thousands of legitimate records. Had they gone unnoticed, my husband's life's work would have belonged to someone else. Guests exchanged puzzled glances. Even the groom looked surprised. Evelyn continued. "Our legal team searched for weeks. Experts examined the files, everyone missed it." She looked directly across the room. "Except one person." I felt my stomach tighten. Surely she couldn't mean. That individual never asked for recognition, never accepted publicity, never requested a reward. Vanessa shifted uneasily beside me. Evelyn slowly lifted her hand. "The woman who protected my family's future is standing in this room tonight." Every guest turned to look around the ballroom. Then Evelyn pointed directly at me. "There she is." The silence was absolute. Vanessa let out a nervous laugh. "I'm sorry, but that's impossible." Evelyn met her gaze calmly. "It isn't." She reached into her handbag and removed a small leather notebook. "I've kept copies of every record connected to that case for years." Then she nodded toward a man standing discreetly near the entrance. "Daniel," she called, "would you please bring in the archival case from the car?" The assistant immediately turned and hurried outside. Every eye followed him. Moments later, he reappeared carrying a large sealed archival case with reinforced metal corners. He carefully placed it on the table in front of Evelyn. No one in the room said a word. Daniel placed the archival case on a nearby table with both hands, handling it as carefully as if it contained priceless artwork. The ballroom had gone completely silent. Evelyn released the brass latches and slowly lifted the lid. Inside were neatly preserved folders, photographs and document sleeves protected beneath clear archival covers. She removed the first folder and laid it on the table. "I've kept these exactly as they were the day we closed the case," she said. "Some memories deserve to be preserved." Guests began drifting closer, forming a circle around the table. Even the wedding staff had stopped working. Evelyn held up a faded photograph. "In this picture," she said, "our legal advisors had already spent 3 weeks reviewing thousands of corporate records. They were convinced everything was legitimate." She looked at me. Then a volunteer researcher asked for permission to examine the original archives instead of the copies. I recognized the photograph immediately. It had been taken inside an old records warehouse years ago. "I remember that project," I said quietly. Evelyn smiled. "I hoped you would." She carefully removed another document. The copied files looked authentic, the originals did not. She glanced around the room before continuing. Pash noticed inconsistencies no one else considered important: different paper fibers, ink that had aged differently, filing numbers that didn't match the company's historical catalogue. Several guests leaned in closer. Those small details exposed forged ownership papers that would have transferred my late husband's company to people who had no legal claim. The room filled with whispers. Our attorneys reopened the investigation because of her findings. She rested her hand on the folder. They won the case because she refused to ignore what everyone else overlooked. I shifted uncomfortably. I was only doing my job. "No," Evelyn replied gently. "You were doing what everyone else had stopped doing. You cared enough to keep looking." She turned toward the crowd. When the case ended, I offered her public recognition and compensation. I lowered my eyes. "I declined." "You declined everything," Evelyn said. "Before I could even arrange a proper thank you, you were gone. My grandfather became critically ill. I eventually learned that." She nodded with quiet understanding. "You disappeared from every professional directory. Every foundation I contacted had lost track of you." Across the table, the groom slowly turned toward Vanessa. "You knew about this." Vanessa's mouth opened, but no words came out. She stammered. Her silence answered for her. Dad quickly stepped forward. "Now wait a minute," he said. "We've always been proud of Pash." Several relatives looked at him in disbelief. My aunt folded her arms. "That's not true." Every head turned toward her. "I've heard you call her a failure for years." Another cousin spoke up. "You told everyone she wasted her education." "And every holiday," an uncle added, "you compared her to Vanessa." Mom's face drained of color. "You're twisting what we said." "No," my aunt replied calmly. "We're finally saying what everyone heard." Vanessa looked around the room, searching for someone to defend her. No one did. The carefully polished image my family had built over the years was beginning to crack in front of both families, their friends, and every guest in attendance. Evelyn reached back into the archival case one final time. She removed a sealed envelope with remarkable care. "I have one last document," she said softly. "And I believe everyone here deserves to hear what's inside." Evelyn held the sealed envelope in both hands for a moment before carefully opening it. "I've only shared this letter with my children," she said. "Tonight I think it belongs to someone else." She unfolded the yellowed pages. "The handwriting belongs to my late husband." The room was so quiet that I could hear glasses being set down on distant tables. Evelyn began reading. If this letter ever reaches the woman named Pash Morgan, I hope she knows that our family owes her more than we could ever repay. She protected everything we spent decades building, not because she expected recognition, but because she believed the truth mattered. My throat tightened. Evelyn continued. If she is ever found, welcome her as you would one of our own. People who protect others when no one is watching are the people worth remembering. She lowered the letter. I've carried these words for years. She looked directly at me. When your sister introduced you by name tonight, I recognized your surname immediately. Then I looked at your face. A gentle smile crossed her face. You were older than I remembered, but your eyes were exactly the same. The silence that followed was unlike any silence I'd ever experienced. Vanessa stared at the floor. She had wanted everyone in that room to see me as the family's embarrassment. Instead, every guest had just learned that the person she'd spent years mocking had quietly protected a family's legacy without asking for anything in return. For the first time in years, I didn't look away. I looked at my parents. You told everyone I threw my future away, I said calmly. Neither of them answered. You never told them why I turned down my career opportunity. Mom wiped at her eyes. We thought eventually none of it would matter. It mattered to me. Dad took a hesitant step forward. Pash. I gently shook my head. I spent years believing I had to earn a place in this family. My voice remained steady. I finally understand that I never lost my worth. You simply refused to see it. No one interrupted. The words hung in the air exactly as they needed to. Evelyn walked over and placed the letter in my hands. It always belonged to you. I carefully folded it closed. Thank you. She smiled warmly. No, thank you. Turning toward the guests, Evelyn spoke one final time. Our family recently established a foundation dedicated to preserving historical collections and corporate archives. She looked back at me. We need someone to lead it. A murmur spread across the room. I don't want to offer you charity, she continued. I want to offer you the position you've already proven you deserve. For the first time that evening, I smiled without forcing it. I'd be honored. The applause started slowly before filling the ballroom. Not because of the job. Because people had just witnessed the truth replace a lie that had survived for years. The reception eventually continued, but nothing felt the same. Guests who had avoided me earlier now introduced themselves. Several relatives quietly apologized for believing the stories they'd been told. The groom's family kept a noticeable distance from my parents for the rest of the evening. No one confronted them. They didn't have to. The damage had already been done. Over the following months, I accepted Evelyn's offer and began leading the Foundation's preservation initiative. For the first time in my career, I worked in a place where my knowledge was respected instead of dismissed. My parents called often. Most conversations sounded less like apologies and more like attempts to repair the reputation they'd lost. I kept those conversations short. Vanessa reached out several times as well. She wanted us to move on. But moving on didn't mean pretending the past had never happened. It meant refusing to let it define my future. I chose peace over resentment, distance over endless arguments, and truth over the version of my life that someone else had written. The day my family introduced me as their greatest disappointment became the day everyone finally learned my name.